We're now getting into the second half of our Cannabis Security event. So I would now like to introduce our panelists for our first panel of the afternoon. Our panelists today are Ken Doige, who is the Vice President of Security and Safety at CannTrust. There's Ken, great. Terry Hoffman, Vice President of Enterprise Risk and Security at Zenabis. There's Terry. And Mike Soberal, who is the Senior Director of Corporate Security at Aurora Cannabis. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Just quickly before we start, just want to remind the attendees that if you have a question for any of our panelists, you can enter that into the question box at any time. We'll try and save a few minutes for questions at the end of the session. So if everybody's ready, we'll just get into questions right away. First question, is there more consistency around regulation and implementation of security now than there was when recreational cannabis was first legalized? Who wants to get into that first? Maybe Ken?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Neil, and thanks for hosting this as well today. I think, you know, there certainly has been certainly a trend toward a little more consistent approach to things, and I think David was very eloquent in his description of you know, the past challenges and kind of where we are and where we will hopefully be in the near future. I think a lot of the consistency that is starting to emerge in the security side of cannabis is really as a result of the good works from organizations like Aurora and Zenabis and others, you know, across the board, whether it's in the recreational retail or in the LP side of things. I think as an industry, we've been coming together. We continue to come together and share best practices and you know, adopting some really good best practices that are based on the Health Canada and the provincial and even municipal rules and regulations that I think our interpretation of those, as David said, those are to be interpreted and applied as appropriate. But I think as an industry, we are sharing those very, very, very well, particularly the wins and losses when it comes to Health Canada and their interpretation of how we're doing the same thing at one facility versus another, and then being penalized for doing the same thing that someone else is doing. I think as an industry, we are driving that narrative rather than the other way around, and I think that's the way it should be.
Thanks, yeah, I totally agree, Ken. There, as again David alluded to, there are still some inconsistencies that we're seeing, but for the better part, because of us sort of driving the consistencies across the board, we're seeing Health Canada recognize that you know, there's some expertise in the field now. They're not just naming heads of security for the sake of heads of security. These people have a background, they have an experience, they have some physical security attributes to them, and they're applying them to the programs. And then programs that test, you know, with the UL and the ISO and everything like that, they're starting to see, yeah, I mean, consistency. But it still comes down to the interpretation of the you know, act by the inspector. So there's still going to be a little bit of variances, but we have certainly seen an improvement.
Yeah, I agree with my counterparts, and David touched on it. Back in 2014, under MMPR, we really struggled. The narrative approach with regard to security controls at that point was not well written. They didn't talk about functionality. We didn't talk about performance. The industry's matured. We've got a great group of consultants, integrators, you know, the LPs, the heads of securities, the CSOs. We all discuss issues. We talk about consistency, and at points we challenge. When we first started in this industry, in these security components, I thought it was a really Swiss cheese. I looked at it that way. It was written by individuals that did not understand security. And now that the industry is matured, I think Health Canada is matured and they're listening.
Thanks, Terry. And thanks, Ken and Mike. Next question. Do regional differences affect movement of your employees? Terry, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. We have operations, 2 in BC and 1 in New Brunswick and 1 in Nova Scotia. So yeah, we have 2 sales licenses. So we have to We use one of our facilities for cultivation and another facility for fulfillment. But some of the challenges that we experience is actually resulting from COVID. So our operations in New Brunswick are in northern New Brunswick, right on the border of Quebec. Actually, there's a bridge that connects Quebec and New Brunswick, and about 30% of our workforce lived on the Quebec side. So when we dealt with the isolation and the maritime bubble, it was challenging for us. So to that point, having executives that reside in Ontario, NBC that want to get into the bubble was a close working relationship with WorkSafe New Brunswick and WorkSafe Nova Scotia on understanding the terms and putting together isolation plans.
Thanks, Terry.
Yes, I mean, same for us. The COVID has an impact on employees being able to travel, how we, the leadership team is spread out across the country, trying to get together or trying to deal with the situations. We've had to apply, write letters and apply for an exemption from border crossings in some cases. But I think that because of the consistency in the laws across the province, and because it is federally regulated, we're not as restricted as it would be in the US, where you're dealing with county to county, region to region, state to state, to the federal level. We don't have that problem so much here. It's just so much, it's more so if you get a security cleared individual in Toronto, he's a security cleared individual at the other facility, it's a paperwork shuffle. So other than the administrative burden, I think, for the most part, and COVID, of course, we're not experiencing too much trouble.
Ken, do you have any thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I concur with my fellow panelists. I think one thing that most of us have had to do, in fact, all businesses have had to do if you're going to survive, is to pivot during these difficult times and utilize technologies appropriately to be able to communicate effectively. But essentially, no, I don't think that we've experienced, significant issues with regional issues and the comings and goings of folks within the organization.
Next question. This is one that David talked about quite a bit, but is the industry still going through growing pains? What has improved and what still needs to improve? Mike, you want to tackle that one first?
What needs to improve? I still, every time I've had a chance to talk to you, Canadian Security Magazine, or any time to anyone, I think the biggest thing is I'd like to see Health Canada bring the security experts to the table at the next round of negotiation. I know that all of our companies have advocates and that are pushing for regulation and such, but for the security side of things, they should really reach out to us, this panel, Dave, and Tess, and sit us down and really take a look at those regulations. We are seeing improvements, though. I mean, there are, as we sort of alluded to in the first question, there is some consistencies that we're seeing now. We're seeing some standardization across the board, which is a good thing. All this is a step in the right direction. What needs to improve is, again, that I think it's essentially communication with Health Canada. That chain needs to improve. Certainly, Dave alluded to it. David, we need more stores. We need more outlets to be able to sell the product. That's going to make a difference to the industry. Yeah, I mean that's where I would start.
If I could speak to that, the directors, heads of security, QAP, security clearances need to be accelerated. There's people that have left this industry being the delays in security clearance. And still today, a quick clearance is 3 to 6 months. And if you can get cleared in 3 to 6 months, you count yourself lucky. And a lot of our operations under RPs and PICs, person in charge, you cannot operate if you don't have the security clearance. So it's restricting operations at points.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Terry. That is, there's zero customer service when it comes to that, particularly when the fact is that we're paying almost $2,000 for each of those security clearances. They got to step up their game. We are trying to be compliant, and I know that it's a regular issue with making sure that you do have a pick or someone there that, so otherwise you're not operating. And that can be a challenge when you're limited. The only other thing I'll add to this, Neil, is what Mike touched on, and that is, looping back to that consistency and that approach. The only way we're really going to get over kind of the hurdles with the interpretations of the regulations for security is to actually be at the table with these folks. Let them actually hear us in an unbiased kind of, gloves off, egos checked at the door, and also positions and titles checked at the door, and just have a very open dialogue with respect to our collective experiences on how Health Canada has, various inspectors have their interpretation of the regulations that is making it very difficult for us. Yes, there is consistency and it's getting better, but I think, and I really like, the work that the ULC and UL has done, particularly on the S4400 standard. That's a question that I have with respect to Health Canada. How much input have they had in that document, and are they going to even recognize it as a document that we want to adopt? So I think that to both of my co-panelists' points, we need better direct involvement with Health Canada, and that's something that I've been challenged with in my own organization. Is again, Terry said this: we have point people, our regulatory affairs folks, or whatever their titles are. They are the point people to go into CTLS, to be able to communicate with Health Canada. But quite frankly, the heads of security, the senior security folks that are charged with protecting these environments, we need direct access to the Health Canada folks.
Next question. What are the challenges around cannabis transportation and logistics? What are the security standards and how are they being met?
So
Terry.
let's.
Sorry, Mike. Okay, Mike, go ahead.
There are no security standards, and Dave alluded that to a little bit earlier. There's very vague wording within the Cannabis Act on transportation security and such, and it has become a bit of a Wild West. The SL 4400, the UL is trying to at least come up with some basic guidelines. And one of the things that I've always, I had a pharmaceutical background before coming to the cannabis side of things is, again, questioning Health Canada, there's a framework already in place within the pharmaceutical industry on how product gets transported to and from the location. Why don't they just adapt that? They completely left open the transport side for the interpretation of how I interpret it, how Terry interprets it, how Ken interprets it. He might send it by armored car, I send it by armored plane, and Terry, transports it through the air, via Star Trek. Right? I mean, it is a Wild West, and it certainly needs to be looked at.
Yeah, to Mike's point, David's done some great work in this industry with regard to target hardening and physical security and getting personnel security and SOPs involved. It is a wild west, and we hope that we don't have an unfortunate incident that would happen to an LP and an employee and an asset that would affect our business going forward in the standards. So us as Zenabis, we assess, control, and we manage for a variety of different means: international, air, freight, and ground.
Yeah, and again, Mike, you nailed it. The fact that it's somewhat hypocritical, quite frankly, to jump through the hoops that we do, and I'm not saying they're not necessary. Making sure that we are eliminating any inversion or diversion is job one. That's a public safety issue, and it serves our interests as well. But the fact that there are so many very specific rules and regulations around how we are securing a licensed facility, whether it's a retail store or a licensed producer, whether it's an indoor or an outdoor grow. They're very specific, and we've got a lot of work that we have to do to make sure we protect these environments. But as soon as it leaves that perimeter, all those rules are out the window. And I just think there needs to be a very robust conversation around how do we establish some industry best practices at a minimum, but quite frankly, I think it needs to have some specific regulation around it.
Yeah, there's some balance on corporate responsibility versus the cost per gram, right? So smaller LPs, LPs that are struggling, it's, they're going to reduce their logistics costs, which puts us at risk.
I mean, when everyone started, we were literally shipping, the cost of the shipment to go from A to B in an armored car costed more than what the entire shipment consisted of. And that's how things started off. It was just automatically go by armored car. It was the high risk. And that's at least for us, it's evolved. And, again, we're all security professionals here. So we've taken some secure steps that are, for the most part, common sense, GPS and so on and so forth. So, I don't necessarily need to ship every shipment armored car now, but I still have no baseline to even go by. I go by what I interpret as a best practice. Terry goes by what he has as a best practice, and same with Ken, but we got nothing to refer to sit there and say, yeah, are we doing this right? We talk together and sit there and say, hey, this is how I do it. But there's nothing, for the smaller producers or for the stores that don't have a security expert on hand. It's up again. The Wild West is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, and what our audience is not aware of is some of the challenges that we have with provincial partners. They're demanding scheduled specific times that you can deliver. It's really, logistics has really turned into a supply chain expertise, and it's evolving.
So we've heard a lot about the impact of COVID, obviously, in the security industry, pandemic plans and things like that. What do you think the impact has been on the cannabis industry? Any changes that you've seen, anything that people are going to take forward with this? Maybe Ken, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, I think, early on, as you know, we were deemed an essential industry. And that posed some problems, obviously, for all of us to ensure that we were doing things in as safe a way as possible and learning on the fly. But I think one very positive aspect of our industry is, Mike, you mentioned GPP, or one of you mentioned GPP practices and GMP practices. The fact that our folks are very used to wearing masks and being in very tightly controlled environments has really helped us in keeping our folks safe and minimizing risks due to COVID. And I think our industry has also stepped up in providing, we make sure that we keep a very healthy supply of PPE on hand for our day-to-day operations. So right away, I know in our Niagara facility, and I'm quite sure my colleagues have done this around the industry, we donated a ton of masks and so on to seniors' residences and things like that. So I think overall, our industry has done very well in managing through this crisis, and I think we'll continue to show leadership. But I think it's also part of just the nature of the business that we're in, that we're used to operating in these kind of environments. So I think it's been a very positive thing, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there was also that uptick in sales, which certainly helped the panic buying and such. We'd like to see that continue on throughout through the pandemic. But being deemed an essential service, already doing good practices, wearing masks and such. We did experience, as I think most of the healthcare or other industries experience, was shortage, trying to keep our supplies up to stock and making sure that we had enough, to carry through. When it first started, we weren't sure if we normally, let's say, maintain a 1 month supply, so we've increased that. And then trying to increase that, we were running into getting that actual supply shipped to us. The gloves, the masks, the gowns, and so on and so forth. But we know this is now for the long haul. So, other than a little bit of cost increase on our part, because again, we increased our supplies of PPE. I think operationally, we put in the COVID measures, the temperature taking, the screening. So, we adjusted our shifts because we had to, now instead of, 100 people showing up for shift and being in the building within 5 minutes, it now takes 20 minutes to get through. So there's some minor adjustments, but for the most part, to Ken's point, yeah, I think we as an industry did quite well.
Yeah, I think the executives of cannabis companies have realized that their workforce can work remotely, which is assisted in cutting cost. And I'm sure unknown that there's been a lot of business plans that have been delayed in execution of 2.0 products and going forward.
Yeah, one thing I do want to add, Neil, and it's not so much, it is somewhat security related, but the fact that mid-stride, the Ontario government decided to stop curbside pickup and delivery of cannabis products that are still deemed essential, was a very unfair practice. It was totally inappropriate, and quite frankly, also continues to pose health risks to folks operating the retail stores. With respect to people coming into those stores. So that's just something I wanted to say, and I'm sure it's supported by others that are participating in this today.
Let's talk about the black market. What impact is that having currently on legal production and sale, and how has it impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, the black market's not going away. I think that's the biggest misconception that's out there, is that somehow this black market's going to be eliminated. If you look down to the U.S., where they've had a bit of a head start, Colorado as an example. If you ask any of their law enforcement parties or anything like that, what's happened to the black market, and the first thing they'll say is it's gotten deeper. So let's dispel the myth that we're going to get rid of the black market, because we're not. I've always said that Bob is always going to go to his person that he's been dealing with for the last 20 years to get a supply from. He's got no interest in going to a store and getting it if he's happy getting it from his buddy, again, for the last 20 years. The government has to change the regulation on taxes. Dave alluded to that. They have to make the supply chain to the consumer more accessible. Those type of methodologies will put a dent into the black market. But the talk of getting rid of the black market or competing against the black market, your black market will always beat you. Always beat you on price. Always beat you on. Won't necessarily beat you on quality. But they will always, adapt and overcome. History of crime, whether it's organized crime or something, they adapt, they overcome, and then they move forward. So we can certainly, and we've been showing that we are making strides in, for the first time, the price point of the black market and the Canadian market is somewhat getting a little bit closer. There used to be a huge gap. Now it's it's a little bit more competitive, let's say. So we're making the steps in the right direction. We need to carry on with that. The government's got to make the product available to the consumer in a faster, quicker, more efficient way. Take away some of these ridiculous taxes that they're talking about, and then maybe we can not eliminate the black market, but we can certainly compete with the black market.
Yeah, the regulatory bodies can assist us with that, Mike. I agree with you. Our consumers have a choice. But we're restricted from marketing and advertising that choice, right? The clean product versus a black market product. So hopefully we can weaken up or loosen up on that over the next couple of years, and we'll be able to chew away at it.
Yeah, I completely agree. One thing I can tell you, Neil, is that I was very pleased to see the news piece this week on the news talking about the OPP's commitment and their blitz going after illicit, particularly the fairly significant grows that are popping up. We're talking thousands and thousands of plants. and the OPP is very committed to taking, doing their part. I think the other piece here is that, and Mike, maybe you can help me. Is it Tony's last name? Oh dear.
Yeah.
Tony, if you're on here, I apologize. But we've recently formed a bit of a security working group with the LPs, and talking. And he comes from a law enforcement background as well. And we really have been talking about how do we create an intelligence-based program amongst the LPs and retailers for information sharing amongst ourselves, but also with law enforcement. And that is going to be the opportunity where we can collaborate and collectively go after the illicit market. I agree with you, Mike. It'll never disappear entirely, but I think as members, important members of the cannabis community, we have a responsibility to do everything that we can, and that has to be supported from our very highest levels at every organization, right down through the organization, that we have a responsibility to do everything we can to eliminate or at least minimize the impact of the illicit market, working collaboratively amongst ourselves on intelligence practices and sharing those with law enforcement, I think is a very good first step.
Okay, so we have maybe a couple minutes. So there's a couple of questions lined up in the chat, so maybe we'll just maybe spend a minute or two on each of these. Is there a different standard for production and distribution only installations?
Different standard for production and installation?
Sorry, production and distribution. I guess the question is production only or distribution only facilities?
Well, your a Health Canada federal license is based on cultivation, production, and sales, right? So it's a hybrid approach, right? Some LPs are not permitted to sell; they're only permitted to cultivate under their license. So,
if the intent of the question is to, does one facility get secured another way than another facility, the answer is probably no. The regulations are pretty standard. We're talking about consistency, but they are standard for when you're building the facility. Health Canada doesn't differentiate between what you're doing within that facility. There is a differential though between a retail outlet, they have different categories: research license versus distribution, sales, and such. But for the most part, there is the regulation's consistent whether you're retail or if there's cannabis in the presence or being grown type. Maybe that's what they were asking.
Yeah, as far as the facility, Neil, we have facilities that were built under MMPR, ACMPR, and the Cannabis Act. So 3 different revs of standards, right? Today we're under the Cannabis Act, which is the easiest rev, and it's fair. I believe it's fair. But individuals that entered this space in 2015, 2016 spent a lot more money than you would spend today on security.
Okay, maybe we'll get one more question in before we have to wrap. Interesting question. How much is business first and security second, or vice versa? I guess in the whole decision-making process.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start with that if you don't mind. I can speak from experience, certainly at CannTrust and even at Fire and Flower, and that is that it is very much about a security culture first. It is not about profits first. It is not about production. Certainly quality and security, I would say, are neck and neck, ensuring that you have that high quality. But security, certainly my experience has been that it is not put on the back burner. Yes, there are financial constraints, as with any organization in any industry, but I think that for the most part, security is mandated. I think right across the organizations that I've dealt with, it is job one, and I don't think it takes a backseat to anything.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, whether it's of course you have to remember that it is heavily regulated on a security side. There's a lot of components. Even with back in the older days, it's lessened. But when you compare it, again, let's say compare our facility to a pharmaceutical facility, it's a night and day security level. And if there's one thing that's consistent, whether we're in Canada, the US, or as we expand globally, any of us, security is always at the forefront of being able to get a license. You know, if you're applying in Denmark or in Germany or anything like that, the question is, what's your business plan? What's your security plan? And it is at the forefront of it. So, I mean, you know, to all the points that Ken did, quality and everything like that, I don't think security takes a back seat at all.
Yeah, the objective of the security department is compliance. So if you're not compliant, you don't have operations, you're not feeding families. So 100% customer service with a little bit of enforcement, but it's a bottom-up approach, and I've been grateful that I've been surrounded in an environment that my leadership team supports the security operations.
Okay, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. So I'd like to thank Ken and Terry and Mike for their time today and sharing their insights. So we really appreciate you spending your morning and afternoon with us, and hopefully chat with you again soon.
So much. Thank you
for having us.